Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Cincinnati School Board's committee that we call Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee. We have folks here that are ready to do business and want to make sure we introduce from right to left if possible, who everyone is.
Good evening, I'm Kaya Grengendine. I'm the manager of state and federal grants. Lenice Dupois, interim transportation director. Jennifer Wagner, treasurer and chief financial officer.
Keith Bolton, board member.
Brian Messer, board member.
Tiana Amat, interim superintendent. Kimberly Hughes, assistant treasurer.
And Kevin Ashley, director of financial reporting and training.
Great, thank you all. And thank you for being here, and thank you for all the work that you do every day. Appreciate it. We're going to go right to our agenda, and the agenda begins with sort of a monthly update, but I'm not sure if we have one this month, but it's a preschool promise and CPS preschool partnership, usually presenting on a monthly basis financial information. And I don't believe they are here or virtual at this time. Great. Appreciate it. And maybe if we hear from them. There's kind of one outstanding issue. It was sort of an issue regarding full day and part day that we wanted to follow up on, and I'm sure they'll get back to us on that. The next item on our agenda is one of those things that the state requires. They don't help very much with it, considering their due dates of telling us information is kind of delayed. So, but to present that, we'll turn to the treasurer to do the introductions and begin that presentation as she sees fit.
Thank you, Chairman Bolton. So this year's a little bit different. We're going to have a tag team of Kimberly Hughes and Kevin Ashley, part of the succession planning thing. They're taking over the forecast presentation. I will say that we still have yet to see ODE's reports, and so a lot of our assumptions are based on simulated data and simulated formulas, and so we did the best we could with the information that we had. There are some significant changes in the budget formula that is having an impact on us. The biggest being, the pass-through funding was eliminated. So the revenues for those students, remember, the pass-through funding was for non-public, the Ed Choice vouchers, the community schools, the autism scholarships, and Peterson scholarships. So our revenues went down because we're no longer passing that revenue through us, but also our expenses went down by a little bit more than what our revenues went down. So that was the first thing. The second issue is on what used to be called economically disadvantaged for pupil funding is now called DPIA, but it's phased in over a 6-year period. So we're only getting 16% of what the formula calculated for in this year. And then, and Kevin will remind us, that's $49 million this year. It was 88 over a 2-year period. Yeah.
It was 30 to 40.
And I shared that with Senator Blessing. And then the third thing that was a surprise to us was that we knew student loan was going back into the formula, but now it's subject to state share. So instead of the $12.5 million we got last year, we're getting 43 cents on the dollar this year. And so I've shared all those concerns with Senator Blessing, but those are the major changes. And then we'll just turn it over to Kim and Kevin. I don't know who's speaking first. Kimberly. Thank you very much. So we just want to give a little overview of the 5-year forecast. And what we want to share with you today is the purpose of the forecast, the factors that influence the forecast and cash balances, the Ohio Fair School Funding Plan, the forecasted revenues, forecasted expenditures, and the forecast summary. Next slide, please. And I'm sure we all know the purpose of the forecast. It's to monitor and report school district solvency, and it allows us to focus on the general operating fund. And the forecast is limited to the general fund itself. It supports financial transparency, and it is a tool to plan for future financial decision making. The format is standardized and required by the Ohio Department of Education.
and it covers 3 years of actual data, current year budget, and 4 years of forecasted data. And we file it twice a year, as you know, November and May. And the factors that influence the forecast, it is the Ohio Fair School Funding Plan, the inflationary rate, pandemic spending, federal related budgets, and future return to the general fund, which is what we refer to as the CLIF plan. Another influencing factor is the student enrollment versus the actual enrollment and the collective bargaining agreement. So as our treasurer likes to say, it's all about the cash. Next slide, please. I'm sorry. It's all about the class. It's all about the class. So CPS multi-year financial plan, and this again shows a 3-year window, and we cannot show a negative cash balance. And the board, with board guidelines, we will not have, it's their will that we not have any new additional levies. That's the guidance that we've received. But this does not include renewal. So keys to maintaining positive cash balances: voter approval of tax levy renewals, Ohio full implementation of the Fair School Funding Plan, which is a span of 6 years, district control of budget, expenditures, and growth, and the anticipated CLIF plan expenditures returning to the general fund between fiscal years 23 and fiscal year 25. Next slide, please. Now we want to discuss the newly adopted Ohio Fair School Funding Plan, and our treasurer has already gone over some of these details, but a brief overview of the FSFP is: it eliminates the pass-through funding for community schools and scholarships. It calculates base costs to educate a student that is unique to each district. The base cost calculation uses student enrollment and student demographic data. And we wanted to provide an example. So based on the enrollment, a funded teacher's cost is computed using a previous statewide average of $62,000. Once the base cost is determined, a local per pupil share is calculated based on the district's capacity to pay. And it anticipates a 6-year period for full implementation. However, future legislation will be necessary in the next 2 biennial budgets. Next slide, please. So we wanted to present you with some graphs to kind of see. Historically, we've received funding for approximately 45,000 students. Under the new adopted formula, because we will no longer receive the pass-through funding, we will be receiving funding for the students that we are educating, and that's approximately 35,000. So this is just historical data, so we just wanted to show you what this would look like. Next slide, please. Also under the Fair School Funding Plan, fiscal year 22, the total base cost per pupil will be $7,200 per student. The state average is about $7,200. So this is split between state share, which is 43.6%, which means we'll get approximately $3,000 per student. And then the local share per pupil is approximately $4,000 per student, which is 56.4%. Next slide, please. The Ohio Fair School Funding Plan, the phase-in percentages are, and this is over the course of 6 years, fiscal year 22 is going to be 16.67% of additional funding calculation. For fiscal year 23, it'll be 33.3% of additional funding calculation. And then fiscal year 24 through 27, not currently set in law. For a disadvantaged pupil impact aid, or economically disadvantaged phase-in, for fiscal year, it's 0%. Fiscal year 23, it is 14%. And again, fiscal year 24 through 57, fiscal year 24 through fiscal year 27 is not currently set in law. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Kevin so he can share about the revenues and the expenses.
Thank you. So just to kind of give you some visuals on, because when you look at the forecast, it's just a ton of numbers and it's kind of hard to digest all that information. So I thought these graphs that Forecast 5 provides through the software are a good visualization of some of the things. So start here at the high level on revenues, showing the 3 years of actual, this year's budget, and then the 4 years going forward. You'll see that dip from 21 to 22, again, relating to the change in the pass-through funding. You'll hear that a few times as we go through. The next slide is isolated to taxes and property tax rollbacks that we get from the state. One of the things that kind of jumps out on this is the last 3 years, the top bar, the teal bar, would be the renewal levies. So the forecast includes the renewal levies. However, they are separated so that it's easy to identify if the levies were not to pass, where the position would be without them. Next slide. This is the state aid. Again, you can really see that drop in the pass-through funding, but as Jen mentioned, the drop in expenditures going out for those students is even greater. So it's a net positive or a net favorable for the district. So I believe a lot of that is related to the DPIA and the categorical funding for special education, gifted, career tech, I think, is in there as well. The other thing that, so Kim mentioned the phase-in. For DPIA, it was 0 this year, 14% next. One of the discussions was how much to include for the other years, for year 3, 4, 5, and 6, because the legislation.
Excuse me, Mr. Ashley, but we failed to introduce our 8th board member and 3.5 finance committee. Oh, he took her away. Daddy, would you like to just say who was just here?
Yes, that was Lillian, and we had a daddy-daughter date at Wicked, so we raced her. So yeah, she's off to see Nana. So that's where she's
Excellent.
headed.
Sorry, Mr. Ashley, but kids are really what is our business. So
Absolutely, absolutely.
yes. Oh, Lord, he's on it again. Do you have any coaches outfit or anything? Go ahead, sir.
No problem. So the other thing, we were talking about the categoricals and DPIA. So with the phase-in, we have to make an assumption in year 3 through 6 of what the legislature will do. We didn't want to say 100% phase-in because that's probably not likely to happen. So we were kind of advised, and we stuck with like the 33%, which the legislature did approve for the formula phase-in already. That's in law. So that's kind of, you're seeing a little additional growth there. If they choose to fully implement, we could see more revenue. Next slide is all other revenue, which is a little catch-all. 2 things on this slide. The yellow box related to the way we were accounting for the tuition assistance. It's the transfer. We were doing a transfer in and out to account for that for 19 and 20. Subsequent to that in 21, we are doing it as an expenditure adjustment, and so it just shows up a little bit differently going forward. The other thing I'll point out on the blue bar includes a lot of different things: the tax increment financing, the Community Reinvestment Act funds, the Medicaid reimbursements, E-rate reimbursements. All of those things kind of roll up into the blue category. The next slide is moving to expenditures, kind of an overview. From 20 to 21, our expenditures did go down. Some of that was due to COVID shift, certain things shifting over to CARES. Obviously, with closure, transportation expenses were down, other things, utilities were down, that kind of a thing. Then going into 22, again, at this high level, that's that purchase service tuition deduction expense going down. The other thing, you'll kind of see those larger blips at the end for the last 2 years. That really represents us putting back in the CLIF plan items, and I'll talk about those briefly in the next 2 slides. Next one, please. Next slide. So one of the things the administration and board has worked through is this CLIF plan. Once the ESSER dollars are no longer available to support these initiatives, certainly the board and administration will be making decisions about which of these initiatives continue. If no other funding sources available, they would come back to the general fund. Perhaps like Title I might be able to take on an initiative. So what these 2 pages, I'll go ahead and have you go to the next page, kind of quantifies that $66 million total over those 3 years, 23, 24, 25. And what we did was try to identify the things that perhaps could be non-general fund. And so we pulled out about 16 million for that, and that left a total of 50 million that potentially would come back to the general fund. So in FY25, on top of our normal budget progression, we've added the 50 million, and then for the next year, we would show that continuing as well. Next slide. This kind of breaks it down by salary, just the salary category. The biggest increases in 22 and 23 would relate to COLA changes and other collective bargaining issues that increase there. Overall in spending, there could also be in 22 some return of student wellness dollars, expenditures that were previously in the 467 fund that are now gradually going to shift back to the general fund. And then there's a little bit of expenditures related to CLIF out at the end, the last 2 years. Next slide is benefits. Kind of goes along that same trend line, going along with salaries as well. Next slide is purchase services. Again, here's the offset of the CLIF, or not the CLIF, I'm sorry, wrong one. The deductions for the Fair School Funding Plan. That teal bar shows that large difference, along with some other changes that are built into the forecast. Next slide is all other sources. The biggest category here is our transfers out of the general fund and to cover the school-wide pool. And then also there's transfers for debt and classroom maintenance that are required as well. The next slide is just a forecast summary that kind of pulls all of that together. The key factor here, I believe, is the yellow line, which is our cash balance going out to the end of fiscal year 26. We do stay positive under this forecast for this year and 2 more years, and that next year potentially would reflect a negative cash balance. So just want to reiterate at this point some of the things Kim mentioned, the keys to avoiding a deficit. Probably the biggest things are voter approval of the tax levy renewals, hoping that Ohio will fully implement the Fair School Funding Plan, which would also help us as well. District control of the budget, expenditure growth during that period, and then anticipating and dealing with the CLIF plan and those expenditures as they return to the general fund. So I think that's all we had. We're glad to take any questions.
Appreciate it. From both of you, if the treasurer has anything to particularly add or highlight, and then we'll take questions after that.
No, I just wanted to reiterate the fact that the state created a budget and phased it over 6 years, hasn't produced the data that we need to do a 5-year forecast. So the out years are very difficult at best. But on that last slide where it showed the cash balance, and it was a very good slide, I really like that, Kevin, because as long as we are spending more than our revenues each year, we're digging into that cash balance every year without generating new revenue. Well, hopefully the phase-in will come faster. I asked Senator Blessing to do nothing else, speed that phase-in up for us. And so that'll help that. But I told them we can't continue to invest in strategic initiatives with this revenue situation that we're in. I think that was it. Oh, so the plan is to have the board adopt it through the treasurer's report on Monday night. The request is to come to finance first. And if you want another public presentation on Monday night, we can do that, but that wasn't the intent, I don't believe.
No, that wasn't the intent to have another presentation, but I think it probably would, within your pre-report, before you start with your, that would be important to at least point the highlights out, because I think this is going to be a difficult thing to kind of sell or explain to the public as to all of a sudden we don't have this amount of money and we don't have these expenditures, but still we're still ultimately responsible for organizing the service. Transportation, I mean. Like, yeah.
The other difficult challenge with the new formula, is when they do their staffing calculation, similar to the way we do it, but we do it in 65 separate schools and all their different grades. They take the total number of kindergartners, divide it by the number, and say that's how many teachers you get. This is the average salary. But I said when you do it when you have to spread across that, you can't spread it across 65 schools and have it be equitable. And so that's a challenge that they're looking at. And so that makes it just a little bit harder. The student wellness thing was a real kind of blow. I was
and how many millions was that? How many millions was that?
Well, we got 12.5 million last year, and now we're getting 43 cents on the dollar, so about 3.4 million, I think, a little over 3 million.
I think that's about right.
Yeah. So that's devastating. And that was funding all of our social workers, school social workers, some of our nurses, all the resource coordinators were coming out of that fund. And so it's all that stuff has to be reabsorbed in the general fund.
Mr. Messer, questions, comments?
The comment is, I love watching this evolve. You know, I'm in my second to last meeting of my 4 years. And 3 of those years was in finance. And I love that it's gotten much more non-school funding expert friendly. The pictures are great. And, you know, I think it's important for the public to understand, you know, we hear the big number, but, you know, we have talked about it's not flexible money, really. There's so many fixed costs. 110 million is just your benefits and salary. Well, that's a couple levies to cover just our benefits and our salaries, to say nothing about running our buildings and actually doing the education and getting all the support services and everything for the kids. And so you start to add those, you know, it's a very tight budget when you actually look at it. And I think you've done just a fabulous job. The color coding, separating out, you know, the one question I did have was on the tax rollback, because obviously that's a big contributor. So can you explain just a little bit more on that slide? What is that, 9? Where that shifts from the 23 to 24.
So, so the 2 blue lines would include the renewal. So the 270 for 24, the 270 million at the bottom, those are continuing levies that will go on. The top blue, the 25, is capturing everything related to the renewal. So the property tax, the homestead and rollback, any other items that relate to that. So if you add those two together, it's 295. So the 2 blue would give us 295, which would actually be a growth of 5 million.
The rollback is
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a half year because it's calendar year versus fiscal year. And then the next year is a full year. So we have to show what will happen if we don't pass that renewal.
Okay, good. So that's what I was thinking it was. So that's a really important. This is what happens. This is if we support it. If we don't,
Mhm.
that's a huge chunk that would obviously have to be made up. So thank you. I think this is a really important one for anybody who's gearing up to help make sure we get the levy passed, is showing that without that blue, it would be devastating to this district. And so, you know, I think generating revenue and cutting costs is going to be the name of the game for the next seated board. I think it further reinforces the need to be strategic about how we're aligned as a district and thinking about choice in a different way, perhaps with transportation not being a small portion of this, and any little amount to chip away at that. And I love that last slide too, where you start to eat into the reserves. Anything you can keep that above the line, the better. So, you know, I think that would be an interesting exercise, is a whole workshop on how do we generate revenue, and what are the things that we could affect that. Some of which is going out and grabbing kids through recruiting efforts, and maybe some grassroots fundamental knocking on doors and the whole bit to get kids back in the district, because that is one way to generate more revenue. Of course, it comes to some expense, but a whole exercise on that, I think, might be interesting to see actually what could be done. So thank you.
Just have a couple of comments. So first, I'll piggyback on what Member Messer has said regarding costs and revenue. I know the administration's aware, but I doubt that the community's fully aware of the fact that this next budget is really the start of a real post-COVID experience. And not only, and we're very committed to growth, but of course there's cost to growth. But the other piece of the whole growth topic is, how much does choice really cost as we grow? How really available are our facilities? And also something I learned long ago, when I first came on the board, as a matter of fact, and it might have been, I can't remember who all kept talking about it, but I know my first 2 years I would hear from more veteran board members that it was all about scale. That when you're staffing something, or when you're trying to accommodate, and when you're expanding programming, as we have consistently done for the last decade, where there is art, there is music, there is PE, there's additional languages, there's far more health supports and whatever. You need scale to be able to provide it equitably to every child. It's just not cost effective to run too small of a school. It's not cost effective if we have to, you know, triple staff instead of double staff. So I hope we keep focusing a little bit on scale. And I don't know if you have any comments about scale, but that was a big important lesson to me, because I'm certainly predisposed to think as small entities are the best. But, you know, if the student numbers aren't where they need to be, you're not going to get the staff, or you're going to be sharing staff, or somebody else is going to get that full staff. So the scale is important. That's why I keep being worried about whether or not we are at full capacity in each of our buildings. Again, it's a question that you guys are dealing with, and I appreciate all the work the administration has been doing on kind of pinpointing that. So that's one issue. A lot of public education. I think we should tell the incoming board to make sure that some sort of message about these changes have to be mentioned almost every board meeting, because it is a shift. And it's also at the same time that you guys have done this great work about the cliff. And so we're assuming we planned how to absorb, but that's a plan. And if we fall short on some of these other more normal or routine, the cliff won't work. And the scariest thing said today is that, you know, we may not be able to continue to fund any new strategic initiatives. And so we better figure out if the current strategic initiatives are getting the results that they should be getting. So I appreciate the report. You know how I am about color.
Yes.
It's good that Mrs. Bates is not here because she gets very angry when we do color, but I'm sorry, I'm a visual learner. I think like Mr. Messer, it gets a lot clearer when
Well, it's either that or you're gonna show a bunch of numbers, right?
and that's
So
not
you gotta
nice.
go with color.
That's great. Any last comments? And how does the grant thing figure into any of this? Is that a source of additional revenue, or is that going down or going up?
Well, we'll get to the projected, well, that's part of the whole budget process. So
Yeah.
this is strictly general fund forecast that's
Right.
required by ODE. And so we submit this report for finance committee and then we'll submit it for approval on Monday night.
That would be great. Thank you very much. Super job. And also I want to compliment Assistant Treasurer Hughes for a presentation last night at the district-wide LSDMC.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I believe too, you were going to be looking into the community reinvestment, and you sent us a memo. So that assignment that was assigned last month has been accomplished, and the board the finance committee and the board has received your research. So thank you.
It's in your packet.
Yep. And it's in our packet.
Yes.
Thank you. Now let me ask if I could, there's like two, number 3 and number 4, where we listed assumptions and the budget building. Are there any parts of issues that need to be addressed there as a follow-up to the presentation?
Which presentation?
The one we just had on the 5-year forecast.
Oh, yeah, so going in line with the 5-year forecast,
Yes.
it's obvious that we have to keep our spending under control and stay flat in order to preserve that cash balance. So this year's budget of the general fund was $609 million. If we do not one new thing, our budget's going to grow by $23 million. Excuse me. Because of steps and COLAs that were already negotiated into the collective bargaining agreement. And then the additional cliff stuff that's coming back. So we have to find things that we're not spending, that we're spending money on, that we're not going to spend money on to make room for that 23% growth. But like I said, that's only funding the current initiatives, not anything new. So anything new has then, we have to dig a little bit deeper. And so we're going through a budget process right now where all central office departments are asked to cut back 10% to make room for some of those items. And so we're working through those processes now. They're due back in early December, I believe. And we'll update the finance committee as we move forward.
So to keep it flat, we have to do what?
Cut spending.
And the first effort to do that is a 10% cut at central office. What have we told schools, or have we told schools anything yet?
Well, they went through the student projections that were adopted. They did, I think on Tuesday, there was a review of the first staffing. That wasn't there, so I'm assuming that went well. And so that's as far as we've gotten. And the non-personnel, I think we're going to be a little bit more, provide more guidance on those spends on non-personnel to make sure that we're hitting our vital few. And so we're working through those topics.
Do you have any question about any of that?
Ms. Amat, did you want to add anything since
Yeah,
I wasn't there
absolutely.
Tuesday?
Turn to the superintendent.
No, I would just add that it's definitely a pleasure to work directly with the treasurer's team on this process. So what we decided to do was to focus on the ice cream cone and really be clear on, to answer your questions about school. What should all schools automatically have as the first tier in order to excel? And then we did that and added tier 2, tier 3, and also a tier 0, which included the fixed grades. And then we decided to start with central office first and to do that first level of cuts of 10%. And the directors are working on their budgets right now. And then as we solidify the projections, we'll move forward with the schools. But we're working together with the schools to see what they need, and then using that tier process to make equitable decisions.
Thank you. And equitable means different things for different schools, but there should be, as you say, that baseline.
With the base, yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you. One last thing about the budget. The process that you've developed, the timeline you've developed, just give me the next 2 or 3 things that have to happen.
So the staffing is due to the school, the first draft of the staffing is due to the schools by November 29th, which is 10 weeks ahead of where it was prior years. And so that they can give us their feedback before they break for the holidays. And so we can use that information over the holidays while we're working to consolidate the budget. And then I think, I can't remember the exact date of early December of when the central office PGSMs are due back in. I think it's the first week of December or somewhere.
Close to that.
Yeah,
All
we're
right.
ahead of the game.
Good. Any comments from the superintendent? You all right? Mr. Messer, you're good? Great. Would the next item be, I have a question about student projections. The board received the student projections for this coming year, I believe at the CAL, at the committee of the whole. And those are the numbers that we're working from and for each school. All right. And we've also received some update from the administration as well on not only the location of our students, appreciate that early return on those proper maps, but also adjustments that have been made to our buildings that are being used for, some of the square footage is being used for other things, or that we've changed the original design, if you will, of the building in order to accommodate more classrooms or more special services or school-based health centers. So all of that we've been asking for, the board has before it. So that's great. Because this is a comprehensive thing that has to happen. Thank you. Anything else on student projections? Here he comes.
Yeah, to that, there was a secondary assignment that came out of the committee of the whole. That we're looking at a much more in-depth, detailed look at the actual enrollment versus projection, and where while we defined were hot spots where we had increases or decreases. Just a quick update on that. We're finishing that work and should have it out in a matter of days to the board.
Thank you so much, because I know the superintendent I know we've had a brief conversation about that. That it's so crucial to have that baseline as to where we are and actually to know what capacity we have in each of our buildings and growth. Like there was growth for the high schools, but not necessarily for the elementaries. And that has to be part of our plan.
I would just like to
Superintendent.
add, the other thing that we never discussed is the census data, which I think is coming out in February. I think that's going to be critical to see where our families are. Are they here? Are they moving out? Are they displaced? So I'm eager to get that census data to make sure our goals are lined up and I don't want to say realistic, but it's accurate based on what we're projecting, based on what the census is, or are we under? Because there's a lot of development going on, and how do we recruit families into our schools? So this is something that we haven't discussed before, but I just want to throw that on the table. I've been doing some research, and I believe it comes out in February.
I thank you for mentioning that. Do you want to follow up on that about the idea of development and where our folks are living or not living, and be good?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think you're spot on. I mean, that data should be rich for us to bake into this next iteration of the strategic plan. Maybe I can be a committee member. I mean, a community member on that.
Absolutely.
Or parent. But, I think laying that out and assessing the trends might start to dictate some future investments, which I think probably could help. And on the subject of development, I anticipate that our mayor and the first lady who will be taking office in January, my guess is they will be sending their child to Cairns, and I only know that because she's been very active in volunteering in the school already there. And I think it may be very worthwhile to have a meeting with the chair of the committee, interim superintendent, and the mayor as it relates to all the questions about tax abatements and everything. Actually, there's so many topics in there: the TIFs, the 25-year abatements that seem to be handed out, and that type of thing. I think there's an opportunity to shape that in a very different way. So I think this, in a broader conversation, could be a great opportunity to engage with our new mayor.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, and I think there's also the new council. I think we're going to be needing some support from the new council as well, and on a number of issues. And one of them certainly is the process of development and where they see it. And I think the superintendent's right to point out we're going to have census data while we get ready for this next strategic plan and while we get ready for the growth piece and where that growth could occur. I mean, it's urban legend, and I don't believe it's true, but it's urban legend that, when we did the facilities master plan, there were twice as many children in the neighborhood of Avondale as there are now. Or for Madisonville, look at the growth that is happening in Madisonville. Look at the growth, and we've been accommodating it to a certain extent on the west side, that growth. So I think being able to use that as a baseline as to where the kids are, I think will inform how we review attendance boundaries, some of which, as we found out in policy today from Assistant General Counsel, some of those were drawn in the 1970s. And so we have a lot of work to do. Some of it will take long, but some of it is a cut to the chase on some of this stuff if we have enough facts and we've seen what we need to be doing, and we keep constant to what we've committed to before, like Vision 2020. There's things we've believed in and we've been working on for a decade. These things don't go like, oh, you have a 3-year plan and you start it and you're done in 3 years. It goes on. So that's a great comment about the census. I appreciate it. Any other comments on this? And thank you for getting all this stuff done. That's very expedited. Appreciate it. We have next the workshop planning. We'll talk briefly about that. Yes. And the treasurer said dates. We have to have a workshop about the budget, and that includes the administration and includes the board, particularly. In some way, it might include the audit committee in some more indirect way or review way. Give us the timeline that you think it should be happening. For us to have the maximum influence.
We used your August feedback
Yes.
as a starting point. So probably sometime in January, when the new board is seated and all the committees have been designed, would be the best time to do that.
Okay, well, you have a start there. The new board starts on the 3rd of January. And that's when we start is when we have tried to announce organization from the committees. And just to assure people, it doesn't mean any decisions occur before that regarding committees, because you and the public get to watch the sausage making of the committee process actually live and in public. It's not a pretty thing, but we could then be doing it anytime at the end or after the end of the first week. And when would there be enough information from the administration to share with the board? And keep in mind, the new board's gonna need additional time to be informed and educated.
Right. Well, maybe towards like the 22nd and the 29th of January.
My cousin's birthday. Yeah. Oh, yes. So that week, is that kind of week available from the administration? Are there big days happening in that week of the 22nd area?
The 22nd is a Saturday.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't know. Typically your budget retreats are on Saturdays.
Right, but
Okay.
is that there like big workflows or something greatly due the next week? Is that an easier time to get things done?
Well, that's what I was saying towards the end of January, because by then we'll have received all the staffing updates, the central office, first and second drafts probably by then. We'll have a better picture of what things look like.
So the 20, is that good? All right. Well, why don't we try to take that to the board? I know staff is going to try to get the minutes done, but even if the minutes don't get done, let's at least, we'll put that in to mention as a suggested date. I think it should be Mr. Messer that suggests the date. So he can gloat. Yeah, oh, wow. Okay, if that works with the administration, then let's plan on that.
Okay.
School meetings. Financial report highlights and grant highlights.
Oh,
Well, that is what we usually do.
1:15. I don't have it.
The
I don't have it on my calendar, so I didn't know.
It's
something new?
the organization, it's the retreat. Yeah, it's the retreat work session because we are having new members.
Okay. So do you want to piggyback on that day, or do you want to do 2 weekends?
I would try, I would hate to do 2 weekends in a row, but I know also that at least current board members balk if you add hours, if it's more than such and such.
Like a half a day, right? Okay.
Yeah,
Do you wanna
so
go for the 29th then, so spread it out 2 weeks?
let's table it and look at it from the calendar. We're gonna get calendars of the new board and the current remaining board, I think, at the end of this, at the beginning of next week regarding the superintendent search. So let's just look and see what's available.
Got it.
So just tell her we're gonna do 3 Saturdays in a row and no food and no break. And we're staying in the building until it's all done. But yeah, those 3 Saturdays, it's a good point from staff that, or whoever, about the 15th. Because that's a full day anyway. And with 3 new board members coming on, it's possible some of that can be done kind of not offline, but separately as we transition them in. So we might not need some of that, and maybe that could still just all be on the 15th. But we're going to play with that and try to make that decision. And then we can bring that to the full board. Sure. Thank you. Thank whoever caught that. Now we're at highlights.
Yeah, Rob can pull up. I did do an overview summary slide that I can go through real quick, as opposed to going through each of the graphs, since we're talking about highlights. So just the key points: the general fund cash balances at the end of October were up over this point last year. Kind of the same things we've talked about. Revenues are down, but that's directly related to the impact of the Fair School Funding Plan and the changes in pass-through funding. So therefore, the district is on track, given that revenues are down, but the related expenditures are down at a higher rate. General fund expenditures through October are down related to elimination of pass-through funding, and salaries and benefit expenditures are higher based on collective bargaining agreements. Related to school-wide pool expenditures, primarily salaries and benefits are higher, is really the biggest change we're seeing there. Preschool students funded through the tuition assistance program for October. There were 833 students that were assigned to some funding through tuition assistance versus 584 at this point last year. Also, the United Way district are down due to the CPP underspend, which offsets the quarterly payments due. And I'll also highlight on preschool, the total enrollment, adjusted enrollment that they provided at the end of October was 1,842 students. So just to give you a comparison there.
Thank you. Mr. Messer, any questions on the highlights? Great.
And then Taya, I think, has the grants piece.
Okay. Yeah, the state and federal chart. So in the spirit of continuous improvement, I have a new graph depicting the efficiency of the state and federal grant spending. And it should be titled the state and federal grants graph. Yes, that one there in the middle. So again, previously it was a pie chart, but I definitely think that this is a better representation to show the efficiency of the state and federal grant spending. So this chart here is the average year-to-date spend by month. And so blue represents the 2020-2021 school year, and the orange represents the 21-22 school year. And so at the bottom, the spend goal is there. So this spend goal is representative of if 100% of the grants were spent. And that's divided among the 15-year period of availability of the grants. So for July through September, similar spend in 21 and 22. But then in October, there's an increase from the prior year to this year, 25% increase. And so I would like to think that is a result of the efforts of the grants team communicating with the budget managers. And we began having planning meetings in late September, early October to share the percent spent last year and to show them where they are currently. So I think that really resonated with a lot of the budget managers. We saw an increase in encumbrances. And so again, the goal is to increase the efficiency of the state and federal grant spend, and we're going to track the data monthly to see what that average spend is and hope to see an increase there. And so then the second chart is the ESSER spending chart. And this chart is showing the spending of the ESSER grant from period to date. So the total available to us for the fiscal year, for fiscal years 21 through 24, it's the orange graph there, and that's the $324 million. The fiscal year 22 budget is $126 million. And then the total expenditures to date, $73 million. And then the orange bar there is the fiscal year 22 expenditure. So to date, for our total ESSER spending, we've spent 39% of that ESSER fund. I just wanted to point out that that previous slide, it showed 25% spent here. The spend goal was 27%, so we were, good job, really good job getting it closer to methodical, thoughtful spends rather than waiting to the end of the year and kind of rushing. So.
Mr. Spencer, any comment, question? Yeah, and as I recall, you were in that process of continuing improvement. You had already continually improved last month with the charts, but we couldn't. We screwed up the presentation by not getting them posted properly. So thank you. And I think that it's one of the areas where everybody has to get ready also to help find ways to brief new board members, very much so, and then probably the financial one is just as important as anything else. I think that would be useful because there's going to be, 4 people that aren't going to be on finance, but they're going to have to be making financial decisions. And the grants and the CRAs, the highlights, the processes. I think I'll find out. I won't make it an assignment because I know you'll organize it, Madam Treasurer, to be thinking about how we can do that, expedite knowledge. That would be super.
2 of the 3 are in school board school.
They've already heard you speak.
Not yet. I'm scheduled for January.
Perfect
Yes.
timing.
Yeah.
That's great. All right, and now, Community Reinvestment, Act.
I do not have any new ones to report this month, but I did bring back the memo because Mr. Banish, who is the Senior Community Development Analyst for the City of Cincinnati, did advise that if you all had any more questions, he would be more than willing to come and do a presentation for finance. So I wanted to kind of firm up whether or not that would be something that you all would like, because I put him on notice that I did share that with you all to let you all know that he would be willing to do that. So he's fine with it.
And I appreciate your follow-up, as we mentioned earlier, and I also appreciate the fact that he's willing to come. I really turned to Mr. Messer that we have one more finance meeting, and the two people that have the greater expertise on the CRAs are the two people we're going to be losing. So there's a part of me that says, well, Mr. Banish should come for the new members, but the new members may or may not be really able to ask the questions that need to be asked. So, Mr. Messer, do you think you and Member Bates would be interested in hearing from them? And also, I'd rather you all do it, and then it's a matter of record or the minutes, and we can maybe do more ongoing kind of stuff like that for the newer folks. If Mr. Messer believes that that's an idea, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I think that's very wise in that we could shuffle some questions. So as the new administration takes over, they're saying, hey, here's some of the cast. Because there could be a whole new cast of characters popping up throughout government. And, it's typical when there's transition. I think it's good to put some of the questions on the list as, they're going through the change too. And then, of course, I do think you should still meet with the mayor shortly after that.
Absolutely.
But I think it gets kind of things coming all the right way. So, yeah.
So if you can see if he's available for that date, that would be great.
Yes, I will.
And I don't know, we can outline that we can easily give him 30 minutes, which he'll certainly need.
Okay.
For both a presentation and a question and answer or a drilling, depending upon where the thoughts are that day. But that would be great. Thank you for that follow-up.
No problem. Thank you.
You bet. And now we go to the easy topics. Yeah. We are, for the folks that are listening or thinking about this, the transportation is a part of the work plan of the Finance Committee. And we've had a number of great presentations and some really good information coming to us recently and from our own administration. And we have some hanging out there, so to speak, continuing conversation about 7th and 8th grade transportation and where we are. And we don't have to keep talking about the same thing, but just to remind the public where if there's something new, the yellow bus piece for our young people and the metro situation as well as metro itself. And then from another couple of board members, better understanding the van process and how many vans and how many kids and that kind of stuff. So I'll let you, with that outline, that works for you, Mr. Messer. And we have had some recent developments in the last 48 hours. And I know some of that is going to be discussed with the full board Monday and some more stuff perhaps for the public as to where we are. But feel free to brief us and get us ready for some of these topics.
Thank you. First, the biggest thing rather than yesterday, the RFP update. We are in the process of looking over contracts for the coming up school year. And on the first slide, so we're in the process We sent, the yellow bus RFP was posted on 11/5. We received the pre-bid questions on 11/16. The due date for the vendors will be 11/26. We request board approval 12/15, and we will also award RFP on 12/15. This gives the vendors the opportunity to put their bids in, but after the award date, they can use that time to prepare and get drivers and buses ready for the next school year. So that is the process that's going on right now in our department. Next slide. We were asked to figure out what it would cost if we created our own small fleet of vans, primarily to help the JFS and the McKinney-Vento kids. The numbers are growing tremendously like we've never seen before as far as kids who are in foster care or in the situation where they need transportation outside of the regular situation that they currently live in. The numbers grow like crazy, and our vendors are having a hard time keeping up with the demand for service for the JFS kids and the McKinney-Vento kids. So what we did was the first column, if we were to start off with a small fleet of CPS proposed, the first column is 11 vans, and the 12 would be a sub van if something were to happen, and then sub drivers and so forth. So the first column talks about, it breaks down the cost of having 11 CPS proposed fleets just for those kids and any other necessary small related transportation items or issues. The second column is 16 vans. And that would be renting the vans versus buying the vans. It's a lot more expensive to buy the vans. So the numbers that you see here are based on the drivers that we would need, the mechanics, fuel, the insurance, repairs, and then if you get down to, you have to, by state law, have proper signage on your vans if they're going to be used to haul students. We need to make sure we have a wheelchair accessible van for handicapped children who might be in that foster care situation. So we would have to have one of the vans, at least one of the vans, equipped to deal with handicapped children. And we also have to store the vans in a place where they won't be tampered with. So we'd also have to make plans for fencing. I think Jacob Center would be the most logical place, but we'd have to provide fencing and security. So we've included all of that predicted expense, and we use the money that we're spending on our vans now as a basis to come up with the numbers that are here. So if we were going to do this with the 11 vans for next school year, it would be 1,320,000. Put my readers on so I can make sure I get this right.
Join the crowd.
Yeah, that didn't happen until recently.
Let me tell you, it only gets worse.
$1,321,933. I don't know why you put the 50 cent on there, but it's around that cost. And again, we base the cost on what our vendors are spending now to operate vans and the number of vans that we try to allocate for number of kids that are increasingly growing. The concern is, by law, we have to transport these kids, and we have to transport them in a timely manner. And that's the problem. The vans that we currently have available to us, they're struggling to get the kids scheduled. Then they're picking the kids up late because they're double dipping with trying to get kid A home and then picking up another group. So it's really a subject that will have to be addressed at some point. We will have to provide an answer. And I've always tried to be proactive versus reactive. So maybe, again, we have two different columns here. Start with 11 vans or 16 vans. However it looks, it may be a viable option as to not facing a lawsuit from DFS or McKinney-Vento on serving these kids properly and making sure that academically these kids are getting to school. You know, even if it's already bad enough that they're being jerked out of their homes and the situation is out of their control, but we are by law supposed to transport these kids and do it in a timely manner. And we are getting more requests for these services than we've ever seen before, from what I understand. So I think it's something to look into. This is just the research that you all asked for the last time I was here. You know, what would it look like if we had a van fleet that could operate and serve the kids who are struggling right now to get back and forth to school, to no fault of their own. It's just an unfortunate situation. So the first column is again with 11 vehicles. The second column is with the 16 vehicles. And the numbers were based on what the vendors are paying now to operate the same number of vehicles.
Before you move on, because that was a very fulsome presentation, do you have a question or a comment about just about the this particular grouping of a van fleet?
Well, it's a very sobering fact of, you know, an increase of students' needs, and it's hard not to connect that with the pandemic and the social emotional effects on lots of people through that. So thank you for at least making us aware on that, and I appreciate the proactive approach. You know, it definitely would be a different model to be owners. And so my question is, if it's, you know, a much broader need, is it something that through the RFP process, people may say, you know what, we'll bid on that and we'll expand our fleet and take that burden on, you know, where today they may think the need is this, so here's what we offer, but we didn't know it was going to be this. By proactively sharing kind of what we're expecting, do we think others may be interested in picking that up? And do we think that that number is going to continue to grow, or do we think it's kind of peaked? Any thoughts on that?
I think it's hard to determine where those numbers are going to go. Right now, the numbers are growing so fast, it's hard to see that they're going to drop anytime in the near future. The groups that we have been working with, one of them is a very small company, so they are doing the best they can, and what we've asked them to do is to be truthful with us and let us know if they can accommodate so that we can look for other services. We are actually trying to include some outside sort of services and to do some research on what they call Uber for Kids, similar groups to maybe accommodate this group of kids. But we're in the research and development part of that. So we're not just counting on this per se. We're really looking for information that is going to help us make the right choice and the best choice for our kids. So we are looking at some outside entities to help support the need for the kids that we have to serve.
Sure.
So what I think I know about friends who are currently foster parents, et cetera, is they may take a child in, but might live or might have been enrolled over here. So the complexity is not just the challenge the child's going through, but just a geographical one, and that they may not be placed. And if I'm also right, I think sometimes they're even placed outside of the district, which is a significant amount of travel time.
Absolutely. That's the biggest problem. We get kids who may be from Fairfield or Lebanon. So the groups that we are working with currently have to make travel addendums for those kids who are from way outside of Cincinnati, and then try to get them home in a timely manner or pick them up and not be late. So we're having those concerns, and we are trying to research other entities who can support the need. We are looking into it. In case this is not an option for next year, we are doing some research, and we have a principal advisory group that's helping us listen to sales pitches from people outside of our geographical area who they understand the need, and they're trying to get their foot in the door in Ohio. So we're also listening and researching and doing some background checks on these groups who may want to come in and offer that service as well.
And then is there any sort of limit, let's say, a child's placed in foster care in, let's say, Mainville, or going further up, even the Washington courthouse. Like, what's the point where they wouldn't go to their original school? They would go to a school in closer proximity.
If it's a foster care situation, that doesn't mean it's a long-term situation. So I don't think the JFS system is equipped to make that call. I think we have to deal with the number, whatever they give us, we have to kind of make arrangements for them by law, by state law, by federal law.
Okay. I didn't know if there was a mileage limit.
I don't think there is a cutoff as far as where they live and where they're coming from, or how long the foster care system. You never know what that situation might look like. But we are really trying to do our due process and really trying to find options that may not be this expensive, but we are very careful about bringing in a group that may not work for us. And safety and the care of our kids is the focal point. We have to make sure.
That's what I was. Thank you for doing that for us.
Yes.
I mean, I can tell you're
we have to
passionate about doing it. And that's the right thing to do. So thank you.
We got to make sure that if we bring in people from out of state who have cashed in on this as a business, that they're the right group to take care of our kids. We don't want unfortunate incidents because we didn't do our homework on the front end.
If I could follow up on that, how many, maybe I'm missing it, how many children is there currently?
I don't have that answer, but I can get that to you exactly. But I know the van company that is ACL, they are very overwhelmed with the number of kids that they are transporting. And I think it's basically because of the distance. Lebanon and the different places that you've mentioned that we're getting kids from, and trying to adhere to the school schedule that the kids have.
Yes, the distance piece.
Yes, that throws in another.
Really, that's when you hear the kid, Uber for kids.
Exactly.
The distance piece might be part of that, or it might work from that standpoint. If we could find a number that this would accommodate.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that we have the number. Let's use our equity policy and practice to figure out this group of children, and then also those groups of children or individuals that, because of their IEP, are required to have the special transport or any kind of special transport.
Right.
And I think if we, obviously, we really appreciate everything that's being done right now in the last several months about all of this, but maybe on a way to look at it is to kind of outline the student body as to who start with the customer piece instead of some of the other ways of maybe looking at it. And you probably already do it. I might be just saying what you do, but knowing that, and these vans could also have multi-purposes given the day.
Correct.
So there's some issue there. So if we can find a way to break down the student population, assuming that, everybody would need transportation, and then everybody that generally before this year and pre-COVID, percentage-wise or numbers, I'd really like to see the student body approach, the enrollment approach, to figure out how we can meet different needs of the different categories of kids.
And basically, you're saying you need the number of kids who are actually involved in this situation right now that are on the vans.
Yeah. I think that's the place to start. And also if there's a listing of the IEPs, obviously with no names on it or what have you. And if the administration can figure out some other categories, and also even with the proper maps, the idea of which kids are really within walking distance, that whole piece Because it is all about all kinds of transportation.
Right, and they start with that. The child has to be eligible for transportation by the regular rules
Right.
before we even suggest that they would need van service.
And then we also have to consider our unit. So similar to our magnet programs and our units are based on different, they're not at all schools, right? So sometimes the travel may be a little further than what we like, but the service is at that particular school. Right, so we have to consider that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point from the standpoint too, is that we need to, I know we try to make sure there's some degree of inclusion and participation in many forms, even for some of our very special units. But yeah, how we place those units is impacted greatly on the cost. That's an excellent point. And maybe we could know more, a little bit more about that. So continue on. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, the treasurer had a question.
So this proposal you have on, is this an add-on cost or is this a full cost?
Well, when I talked to the accountant, he was trying to be competitive with the vendors, and I was thinking that we would make this be available, plus maybe not so much of the vendors use, but we're not trying to compete with the vendors. We're just trying to add services so that when we get in the situation where the vendor can't or won't step up, that we're ready. It's an add-on cost, yes.
Jeremy.
I'm sorry.
Jen, sorry.
My apologies. I was asking about the budget costing estimate, whether it was an add-on to the budget or a replacement of current services. And it sounds like it might be a little bit of replacement, but mostly an add-on.
Mostly an add-on. And since it's an add-on, you may want to go back and say, maybe we reduce it to start 5 and maybe not have as many, but still be in a place where we can serve these kids who come to us that we're currently struggling to serve.
So I guess we then need the cost and the budget of that whole, of our current situation, as well as an analysis of who we're not serving, that we should be serving. Because I can see there's a value even with the additional monies. I can see a value to one part of transportation that we own and take care of instead of this constant dependency. And I know we've prided ourselves on the contracting out that's been for decades, but we've now seen some of the limitations of that as well. So maybe another thing to ask for would be the current budget for these, for the transportation of these kids.
Okay.
And you can proceed then.
Next slide, please. And this is just a review of the conversation we had back in October when we started talking about the possibility of the pilot and putting the 7th and 8th graders back on yellow buses. The first slide is talking about just the process and what it would take for our department to put those kids back on the yellow buses. So it's just a review, and I wanted to make sure before we talked about, yes, go ahead with the pilot, that you understood what we were going to have to do and the process we would use to make sure we did it correctly. The next page is the same, and it explains why we decided to use the 2 schools that we talked about in the pilot and the information that we used to make that decision. So we've seen this before, but I wanted to make sure we brought it up again prior to making the next move. And then on the next page, we agreed that we would try, or the consideration is Clark and Schroeder. I've talked to both administrators, and they were happy over the moon with the idea of putting their 7th and 8th graders back on the yellow bus. We did have a survey, less than 1%, but we are pushing the schools to get more response from the survey from parents. One of the questions that the parents did have is how will my child participate in extracurricular activities if they are back on the yellow bus? So that was one of the concerns that came out. But we're still waiting for additional parent surveys. We called the schools and asked them to make a push for the parents to answer the survey so we can give you reliable data based on what the parent concern is. But I know that was one of the questions that did come out. Well, if my child's on the yellow bus and they participated in basketball, cheerleading, or whatever, how am I to get them back and forth to school? Will they be allowed to keep the Metro card? So that was one of the concerns. So that, again, we suggested Clark and Schroeder, and this is the information that would help us make the pilot a reality.
On that 7th and 8th grade pilot, I think the best thing that happened about the proposal was that we agreed that there would be that survey that you're talking about. And that survey to those particular schools, because we're not going to do it if we're talking about such a small number of kids.
Right.
Might not be a bad idea, to Mr. Messer's point a few months ago, to kind of have a sense of the 7th and 8th grade families, or would-be families, maybe next year, that would prefer yellow bus. Do it more as a wider district survey to inform what we might want to be doing. Because I think, especially if there's siblings, I think there's a treasurer that raised this issue about yellow bus might be good, but as you just mentioned about the extracurricular, but more particularly, even the extracurricular, it's so that brothers and sisters sisters in the same bus makes as much sense as us providing two ways. We could break it down that far. The more we customize this, at least if we have the scale for it. So I might be interested in the survey. I'm getting less and less interested about the $400,000. Just as we look at this, because I'd rather put that towards solving the problem with some of the other issues. But again, I don't have the final opinion personally yet, but I'm very interested in the survey and the customization more than wanting to spend $400,000 right now. But I appreciate the work on it. Nestor, you good?
Next slide, please. And that was just the review of the cost that we talked about earlier.
Yes.
Next slide. And this was, we had Mr. Palmer here earlier in this school year, and we did the process of the entire district, 7th and 8th grade, going back to yellow bus service. And this is just the outline, and the chart will show you, and then the cost at the bottom of what it would take to do that for next school year.
And since we're in the midst of this bit of a controversy, not surprisingly, which we will deal with later, not in this meeting, but even if 7th and 8th graders families could have the option that we plan on 7th and 8th graders being in yellow bus across the district for some very obvious reasons, but if they wanted to opt, could they, asking general counsel, would it be allowable? Because now they're talking in terms of competition and private vendors and what have you. Would it be allowable that families could choose for the year that the 7th and 8th grader could use the Metro thing if we had an individual pass? Or apparently Metro is reconsidering even having us use their system. If that's a legal possibility, part of a mix and match where the family, I think if we have enough scale, customization, I think is going to be part of the answer. Treasure. Exactly. I don't know. How many 7th and 8th graders do we have that need transportation? We can drill it. The more information we have about this, the better. And we do have a window of about maybe 90 or 100 days, maybe, So that would be an interest of mine anyway. Unless Mr.
I
Mecca
think
has
we
an
could
objection.
probably include that in the survey as a question.
Yeah.
If you had a choice, would you choose to stay with Metro or would you opt to have your child on the yellow bus? I think that's a very good question. And if the parents decide they're not going to be so angry with us when things don't go so well because it was a parent choice.
For no reason that they made the wrong choice.
Right, right. Even though I've had that happen as well.
I do think it's interesting that
You'll have to answer the extracurricular question for them.
Yes, yes, we'll have to add that. Extracurricular and overall, would you
Yeah.
prefer staying with Metro?
And I do
Mr.
think
Mecca.
that change management is change management. So, when people hear something new, then, people respond. Some people are like, okay. Others through the change curve. Some people just hit panic. And then there's everything in between, just anxiety and all that stuff. Just any change.
A lot of hitting panic.
Yeah. So that being said, I think it's fascinating that some are like, well, if we get yellow, can we also keep the card? Well, if it's safe enough to ride at home after sports, then it's safe enough to ride in the morning. So, I do think some have gone through the change card, but I think they need to know if you want yellow bus, it doesn't mean you also get this too.
Exactly.
And I think that has to be a very
That
clear
has to be very
part.
clearly communicated in the decision-making process and in the survey.
Yeah, and it would have to be the individual child. That's what I'm asking. Is family opts for two different things for their 11th grader versus their 7th grader? Are we allowed to do that kind of stuff? Again, scale by customization. Go ahead. This is stimulating and troubling.
Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a summary of what we need to consider and decisions that need to be made as we go through the process. Again, we have the eligibility. So it's 1.25 miles for 7th and 8th
That's
graders.
an excellent point on the geographic, I'm sorry.
And then can students have two types of service, yellow bus and Metro? That's something we'd have to consider. Or I think I like the idea of the parent choice. And then geographical boundaries, attendance boundaries. Since we have school choice, would a student from Sailor Park be eligible for a yellow bus? Probably not if they're going to Schroeder. They would probably have to stay with Metro. It doesn't make sense to have to route a yellow bus all the way over to Sailor Park and to get to school on time at Schroeder. So that would be an issue or a concern. Next slide, please. Determine how to support students involved in extracurricular activities. That came out loud and clear, and there's a few people who have answered. And decide if using a CPS fleet in conjunction with vendor vans will increase vehicle options for student transportation needs, and consider the growing number of JFS and McKinney vendors. Those are some things that we need to consider. And if we're going to move forward with the pilot, we probably need to be letting the vendor know now or soon, because they have to get those drivers up and ready and buses up and ready for January.
And we don't know yet what the survey has told us, or we have too limited of a number responding to take
A
action?
limited number, and we can push more to get parents buy-in. Since we did send out another call, we can push more, but I'd like to see a little bit more.
Yeah, I think, yeah, again, I don't know how the board, we've talked about it, and if there's a part of the agenda Monday night, just as a, I think, transportation update or something, that maybe we can get the sense. I did feel that there were a few board members that were leery about the 400,000, from a standpoint, even though allegedly we were going to be saving from Metro. It's a number of these things are kind of up in the air right now. But yeah, maybe we can, Mr. Messer will remind me, that should be part of the update regarding transportation, that maybe, as she points out, they need to move ahead on that. Anything else for the go to the order on transportation.
That's all we need to talk about right now.
I hear you.
That was a lot.
I think you should actually probably, if it were legal, probably slip me at least a $5 bill for not engaging in this quite yet. But we're in the midst of something, and you're all in the hot seat, and we are too. So if that's okay. I only have other business. That's reasonable. First, a part of other business pertains to a topic, and Mrs. Bates wanted to talk about it briefly too. The audit committee, and we've said this in full board, the audit committee has been working on a succession or transition or how to rewrite the charter to pertain to who's the chairman and vice chair. And a member came up with a good thing. And the audit committee is going to talk more about it this next month when they meet. And as part of that discussion, and Mrs. Bates and I both were at that meeting. I was at 2 meetings at once, and she was really kind of holding down the fort on that. One of the suggestions is that maybe the board would take back, or the finance committee could take back, is a suggestion for the audit committee to contemplate. It was certainly one of the proposals from one of their members that they've already talked about. It's quite extensive. It's very organized. But to say if they are interested in this process about chairmanships and longevity and what have you, that as a board established committee, that maybe the audit committee, the community audit committee, should reflect the processes that the board uses, which is an annual election of a chair, so that the chair can serve multiple years if people vote for them, or not if somebody else wants a chance. So if it's okay with you, I know it was okay with Mrs. Bates, having been she was at that meeting, then we might suggest to the audit committee when that convenes again, as the board's suggestion is, if possible, maybe you should reflect what we do. If that makes sense to Mr. Messer, then that would be all 3 of us, at least having that opinion, and we're members of that committee. So I think that makes sense. I don't know how the treasurer feels about doing that, or you and the internal auditor are the guest stars at the audit committee, which is not an easy task.
I'd like to open up the floor. Lauren, did you want to make any comments? Okay. Yeah.
There's just one of those 282 people that are sitting there in the audience. And we do want to thank the audience today. Our in-person audience today has been so reserved and so quiet. And we appreciate the spacing that you've done, the ultimate spacing of post-COVID. So we'll take that back. The other thing to forward out of committee is something we've talked about once before, and I believe we've discussed it in executive session as a topic, and General Counsel has explained it to us. Our good partners at Cheviot School, and also the great city of Cheviot, have a piece of property that has been used and developed, and is how shall I say it, a resident, so to speak, has expanded it, and it's been before the state school board, and it's been before ODE, and it's been before a number of the village councils and townships, and also another school district, Oak Hill School District. But it appears that an arrangement has been made where which is a win-win-win for 2 school districts and the city of Cheviot, and they've asked us to try to forward it along to the November 22nd, and it would be in the form of a resolution dealing with a particular piece of property and a division of revenue, if you will, And also, it would allow Cheviot itself to maintain this group as well as show no harm to it. And no harm would come to us or Oak Hills. And I'd like, since we've talked about it as a full board, and general counsel's advised that it's a good thing, I'd like us just to forward it from the committee so we don't need a 48-hour waiver or any of that stuff, and we've done due diligence on this topic, if that works for you, Mr. Messer. I'm liking it. Anything else from any seat, especially the hot seats, okay, or probably the other hot seat along the way? We good? Are we good? Well, appreciate the participation and appreciate all the good information, and thanks for being so fast with the data. That just means so much, and I know we ask a lot, but it helps us make better decisions, and hopefully it makes us all work together. So we are done. I declare this meeting over. I will